Okay, so when you think Emily Dickinson, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For most of us, right, it's this very specific picture: a lonely spinster, always in a white dress, kind of hiding out from the world in her house in Amherst.
And this whole image, it's not something we just made up recently. People were calling her the myth even when she was still alive. But here's the thing about myths. They're usually just a tiny and often twisted piece of the real story. The true story? Oh, it's way more revolutionary than that. It's about quiet rebellion, pure genius, and a secret. A huge secret she took to her grave. And to really get it, we actually have to flip the script. We're not starting at the beginning. We're starting at the very end of her life.
All right, so picture this. It's 1886. Emily Dickinson has just passed away. She leaves her sister, Lavinia, with one very serious final wish: burn all my papers. And Lavinia, being a good sister, starts to do just that.
But then she finds this locked chest. And of course, she breaks it open. Inside, she discovers something that just stops her in her tracks, something she couldn't bring herself to burn. We're talking about 40 little hand-sewn booklets, they're called fascicles, plus a whole bunch of other loose papers. What was in that chest? Well, it was basically an entire secret world of writing, a lifetime's worth of work that almost nobody knew about. We're talking nearly 1,800 unpublished poems. Think about that. Almost none had been published while she was alive, and the very few that were, they were totally changed by editors.
So this leads to the big question, right? Why? Why would she hide this absolute treasure from the world? Was she just shy? Scared of what people would say? Well, it turns out the answer was sitting right there in the poems all along. They were just so radical, so different from anything anyone in America was writing at the time. See, Dickinson wasn't just playing by the rules of poetry. No way. She was basically taking the entire engine of poetry apart and rebuilding it her own way. She was like a modernist before modernism was even a thing, right in the middle of the super formal Victorian era. And this is where you can really see how much of a rebel she was. So, regular poetry back then, it was all about perfect rhymes, predictable meter. Dickinson, she's like, nah. She uses what we call slant rhymes, words like room and brim. They almost rhyme, but not quite, and it gives you this kind of unsettling feeling. And the rhythm? She takes the beat of church hymns, something everyone knew, and just shatters it. And of course, the big one. She ditches commas and periods for those famous dashes, totally changing the pace and feel of everything. I mean, just feel the energy in that. Wild nights, wild nights. But you have to remember, back then, people looked at this and didn't see a genius at work. They saw something that looked, well, broken, unfinished, just plain weird. Her style was so personal, so ahead of its time, that the world just couldn't catch up. And this brings us to a really crucial part of the story. Because when her poems finally did get published, it wasn't really her work that people were reading. Not at first, anyway. This is a perfect example of what happened. The first editors, they honestly thought they were helping. They saw her work as something that needed to be fixed. So you can see here they swapped out her words to make the rhymes more traditional. Alcohol becomes delirious whirl. They ironed out her bumpy rhythms, and worst of all, they replaced her dashes with regular old punctuation. And in doing that, they completely changed the poem's soul. And fixing this, well, it took forever. It was basically a massive literary detective case that spanned decades. The first books of her poems sold well, but they were this corrected, sanitized version. It wasn't until 1955, think about that, almost 70 years after she died, that a scholar named Thomas H. Johnson finally published an edition that showed the world what she actually wrote. Okay, so now that we have her real voice, her real words, we can go back to that myth we started with, the lonely woman in the white dress. And surprise, surprise, just like with her poetry, the truth is so much more interesting, so much more colorful. Yeah, that image of her, like a ghost in white, hidden away, it's really stuck with us, hasn't it? It's what everyone pictures. But what did she have to say about what she wore? Right here, in one of her letters, she talks about wearing a brown dress with a browner cape. Now, it's true, the only dress of hers that we still have is white, but that was just a normal house dress for the time. The myth just flattened her, you know? It took this really complex, lively person and boiled her down to one single ghostly color. So she wasn't some ghost floating around. She was a woman with real passions. She was this incredible gardener, a prize-winning baker. Her recipe for black cake is still around. People still make it. And that whole isolated thing, not really. She built these incredibly deep, powerful relationships, mostly through her letters and poems. And there was one person, above all.
That person was Susan Dickinson. She lived right next door, was married to Emily's brother, and was, without a doubt, her most important reader. Susan wasn't just family. She was Emily's audience, her sounding board, her muse. And just look at the numbers here. It's staggering. She sent Susan over 250 poems. That's way more than she sent to anyone else. She even told Susan once that, besides Shakespeare, Susan had taught her more than anyone. So let's reframe this. This isn't a recluse starving for an audience. This is a brilliant artist who very carefully chose her perfect audience, an audience of one.
So when you put it all together, her totally radical style and this very deliberate private audience, it changes the whole picture. It completely reframes how we should think about her legacy and that old idea that she's somehow failed because she didn't publish. Look, she wasn't some strange woman who couldn't get a book deal. She was a visionary, an artist creating something so new, she knew her own time wouldn't get it. As she put it herself, she was writing a letter to the world, a world that hadn't even written to her yet. It was a message in a bottle sent to a future that she trusted would one day be ready to listen. And her story, it's just a fantastic reminder of a bigger truth, isn't it? That the history we get is so often the edited version. It's the story that's been cleaned up and made safe for everyone. The real, messy, brilliant truth, that's the stuff that's usually waiting patiently, sometimes for a century, inside a locked chest.